The lives of the Fellows and Hadaway's families would be forever changed on October 9th, 1986, sending them on a 32-year hunt for justice. The fight for the families was anything but easy, but the tenacity of Susan Fellows and Michelle Johnson-Hadaway paid off. And in 2018, they would finally see justice for their bright, beautiful 9-year-old daughters, Karen Hadaway and Nicola Fellows. Up until 1977, the Fellows and Hadaway's families had lived very separate lives. They knew of each other, but were little more than acquaintances. That was until Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway were born. The two little girls lived just doors away from each other on the Mooslecombe estate in Brighton. Despite going to different schools, the two became best friends, playing outside together, telling each other their deepest, darkest secrets, and doing whatever else it is the little girls get up to. The lives of the Fellows and Hadaway's families would become intertwined forever on October 9th, 1986. By this point, the families were relatively close. After all, their children were best friends and were practically inseparable. However, October 9th, 1986 would bring the families together through a shared tragedy. A tragedy that would take them on a 32-year hunt for justice. On October 9th, 1986, Karen and Nicola returned home from school, running through the front doors of their respective homes, eager to get changed and play outside. Nicola's mother, Sue, told the Mirror newspaper, quote, "She came in, chucked her shoes off, pulled the other ones on, and said she was going out to play. Now I wish I'd said more," end quote. According to Sue, the last time that she saw Nicola and Karen was at 5 p.m. when they were playing with a roller boot on the estate. However, this is not the last confirmed sighting of the two girls. The next confirmed sighting of Nicola and Karen was when a 14-year-old girl saw the two at some shops on Lewis Road. The 14-year-old told them to go home, scolding them, saying that their parents would be worried that they were so far from home. Karen and Nicola ignored the teenager, with Nicola turning to Karen saying, quote, "Come on, let's go over to the park," end quote. Karen and Nicola knew that they were not allowed into Wild Park, which they just referred to as the park. Nicola was told by her parents that the boogeyman lived there, and they told her that in the hopes of scaring away from her ever entering on her own. Sadly, for unknown reasons, the two 9-year-olds entered the park. Their intentions were innocent. All the little girls wanted to do was play. But in the cover of darkness, a predator was lurking and watching them. The last confirmed sighting of Karen and Nicola was when they were seen near a police box on Lewis Road. It is then believed that the two girls walked into Wild Park. Witnesses also remember seeing a man in a light blue top lurking in the area, watching Karen and Nicola. This man was later identified as Russell Bishop, who also lived on the Mooslecombe estate in Brighton. Bishop was well known in the community for all of the wrong reasons. He was known to lie and steal and considered himself somewhat of a ladies' man. He fancied himself a ladies' man because he had multiple girlfriends at once, and disgustingly, most of them were under the age of 17. Some of his girlfriends were still at school, giving a small insight into his sick and twisted mind. Bishop noticed that Karen and Nicola were alone, with no adult in sight, and Bishop took the opportunity to commit one of the most heinous crimes in Brighton's history. Bishop spoke to Nicola and Karen and forced them into a concealed area. It would be here that he would strike, taking the lives of two innocent girls. Sadly, this wouldn't be the last time that Bishop orchestrated such an attack, and it would take 32 years to bring him to justice. According to court documents, Bishop approached the girls, kidnapped them, taking them further into Wild Park. Once in a concealed area, he punched Nicola in the face. He later confessed that he had done this as a punishment for calling his 16-year-old girlfriend, Marion Stevenson, a slag. Now, this is your content warning, as the episode from here contains details about sexual assault, assault, and the murder of 2 young children. In a sick and twisted attack, Bishop sexually assaulted Nicola and Karen before strangling them to death with his bare hands. Those who initially discovered the crime scene said that either Nicola or Karen had foam coming out of their mouths, and that Karen's head had been resting on Nicola's arm, indicating that they had possibly been positioned like that. By 8 p.m, the Fellows and Hadaways began to worry. 8 p.m. was Karen and Nicola's bedtimes, and both girls knew that they had to be home way before then. Unable to wait any longer, Michelle, Karen Hadaway's mother, called 999 and sounded the alarm that the 9-year-olds Nicola and Karen were missing.
Where were these children last seen?
They were last seen over at the Coldine shops at the bottom of Coldine Lane. I thought my little one had gone up to her friend. And when she didn't come back about when it started getting dark, I phoned her friend, and her friend's mum said she hasn't been up there.
And what time was it they were last seen?
Pardon?
What time were they last seen?
At about 5:30. It's not like her to go, too far away unless she's going usually to a friend's house.
And who am I speaking to now? Mrs.
Hadaway.
Hadaway, Hadaway, is that?
Right, yeah.
Who's the other mother, Mrs.?
Mrs. Streeter. Mrs. Fellows.
Right, and they're 2 9-year-old girls?
2 9-year-olds.
Any idea what they were wearing?
Yeah, my daughter was wearing a grey pleated skirt and a green Coldine jumper with Coldine school written on it.
Yeah, what? A green sweater, you say?
Green sweater.
Right, and the other girl?
Pink trainers, white socks. I haven't got the faintest idea. So what was Nicola wearing? A peachy brown sweatshirt and a checked skirt.
Got no socks on, red shoes.
Red shoes, no socks.
Sorry, peachy brown sweatshirt.
And a brown striped skirt. Check skirt.
All right. I'll get somebody to come and see you. If they return in the meantime, if you can let us know. And try and check around to various other people.
Yeah, well, we've been walking around for hours. I've nearly collapsed.
Yeah. Well, I'll get somebody to come up and see you.
Okay, thanks then.
The entire estate rallied behind the families, offering to help in whichever way that they could. Police arrived, and soon after they had sent out a helicopter to see if they could find the girls, but to no avail. As darkness drew in, the Fellows and Hadaways became increasingly worried. Disturbingly, on October 10th, 1986, Russell Bishop joined the search for the 2 little girls that he had just murdered the night before in cold blood. He proclaimed to the police that his dog, Misty, was a tracking dog and would be able to assist them in following the girls' scents. In reality, Bishop just wanted to insert himself into the investigation. Bishop was close by when 2 18-year-old volunteers made the horrific discovery. Huddled together on the floor were the bodies of Karen and Nicola. As previously mentioned, they had been sexually assaulted before being strangled and left in the woods. The news was relayed to the Fellows and Hadaways families, and Sue Fellows was in such a state of shock that she just passed out. She was unable to come to the terms with the fact that her bright, beautiful 9-year-old daughter was dead. It wouldn't be until days later that Sue would visit the morgue to see Nicola's body. Upon arriving at the morgue, Sue broke down in tears. She told the Mirror newspaper, quote, "She didn't look like her. There was bruising all over her face," end quote. The search for the 2 little girls was now over, but police had the task of finding their killer. Their suspicions immediately turned to Russell Bishop. He had been acting very suspiciously during the entire search, and other volunteers remembered that he had run towards Nicola and Karen's bodies when they were discovered. He also began telling them details that the killer would only know before, he even arrived at the bodies, such as the fact that one of the girls had a white foam coming out of her mouth. A police officer who was at the scene recalled that Bishop had run to where the girls were found, but he didn't get close enough to have a good look, and therefore would not have been able to see these details. As soon as the police discovered the bodies of Nicola and Karen, they cordoned off the scene and ordered everyone to stay back. For weeks after the case, police kept a very close eye on Bishop and noticed that he was acting stranger than usual. They brought him in for questioning several times, and with each visit, his story changed. Eventually, police believed that they had enough evidence to charge Russell Bishop with the murders of Karen Hadaway and Nicola Fellows, and on October 31st, he was arrested in connection with the murders. He wouldn't be formally charged with the murder of Karen and Nicola until December 3rd, 1986, and was ordered to remain in custody until a trial date could be appointed. The residents of the Muscombe estate were in a state of shock. They knew that Bishop had a predilection for young girls and was a petty criminal, but they had no idea that they lived right next door to someone who could be responsible for one of the most horrific and depraved crimes in British history. The Hadaway and Fellows families began their grieving process with the whole estate behind them, ready to help the devastated families however they could. I could not imagine the pain of losing a child, nevertheless losing a child in a brutal act of violence. For the community, the arrest of Russell Bishop was just the start of the grieving process. However, the path to justice would be filled with hardships and tragedy. In 1987, Bishop took the stand at the Lewis Crown Court, where he was accused of the rape and murder of Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway, both just 9 years old at the time. Bishop testified that any trace evidence found on the girls' bodies was because he had checked their bodies for a pulse when they were found in the event that he would need to administer CPR. This was quickly disputed by the prosecution. If you can remember earlier, I spoke about how the police officer who was at the scene said that Bishop had not even gotten anywhere near to the girls' bodies when they were discovered. However, Bishop's defence put forward the notion that Bishop could not have been responsible, as he was seen outside of a fish and chip shop at around 6:30 that evening. This time is significant, as this was the estimated time of death for both Nicola and Karen. What the defence had failed to mention when putting this forward was that the pathologist and forensic investigation teams failed to take the temperatures of Karen and Nicola. Without this, they would have been unable to state an accurate time of death, leaving them to create an estimate, something that would later hurt the prosecution's case. Forensic experts later estimated that Karen and Nicola could have died anywhere between 5:15 and 6:30 on October 9th. This wasn't the only failing by police and forensic teams either. Karen and Nicola had been manually strangled to death. However, the forensic photographer had failed to use measurement indicators when photographing their wounds. They also failed to accurately record the fingerprints, i.e. not using a fingerprint measure indicator, and did not analyse a bloodstain found in Karen's underwear. It is unsure how or why the crime scene investigation and forensic science teams failed to collect and test evidence properly, but their failings were instrumental to the downfall of this case. There was also another key piece of evidence that was called into question very early on in the case. In the days after Karen and Nicola were discovered, police found a blue Pinto brand sweatshirt discarded on the railway line at Muscombe Station. Can you guess what Russell Bishop was last seen wearing on October 9th, 1986? A blue sweatshirt. However, much like every other piece of evidence in this case, police had yet again failed to properly process it, rendering it all but useless in the case against Bishop. As the sweatshirt had not been processed correctly, Bishop's defence team were able to use this to their advantage and convince the jury that this was not a reliable source of evidence. After just 2 hours of deliberating, Russell Bishop was acquitted of all charges after being prompted by Justice Schumann, who said, quote, "Unless the jury was sure first that the girls were dead by 6:30 p.m, they should acquit." End quote. Russell Bishop walked out of Lewis Court with his head held high, firmly believing that he had gotten away with murder. police were determined not to give up on the case and would spend the next 32 years hunting for justice. In 1989, Bishop was captured by journalists in Brighton city centre, handing out leaflets pleading for information in regards to the murders of Karen and Nicola. Bishop brazenly paraded around Brighton, putting on the act of being the good guy, all whilst he knew deep down inside that he was the one responsible. Bishop went one step further and began harassing Barry Fellows, who is Nicola's father. In a sick and twisted plot, Bishop claimed that Barry was the one responsible and that Barry had watched Nicola be sexually abused whilst a lodger who lived at their home filmed it. Bishop would continue his torment by spreading lies around the estate about Barry and spray painted, quote, "Fellows out" on the Fellows' home. Barry Fellows told Sir Trevor MacDonald in an ITV documentary, quote, "Bishop knocks on my door and the first words out of his mouth is, 'I didn't top the girls,' not, 'How are you?'" End quote. The Fellows family were reeling from the death of their 9-year-old daughter Nicola, and they were now dealing with accusations and harassment. This naturally sent Sue and Barry into a state of deep depression, and as happens with most missing person or cases like this, the two eventually got divorced. In 1990, guess who was back on the police radar again? None other than Russell Bishop. But this time, he was wanted in connection for a different crime. A 7-year-old girl identified Bishop as the man who had kidnapped, raped her, and attempted to murder her. Miraculously, the girl survived and was able to tell the police everything. This time, Bishop was found guilty and sentenced to a minimum of 14 years in prison for kidnapping, rape, and attempted murder. Whilst Bishop was inside serving his time for the attempted murder of the 7-year-old girl, UK lawmakers were working very hard behind the scenes to make changes to the law that would see Bishop put away for the rest of his life. In 2005, the double jeopardy provisions of the 2003 Criminal Justice Act were repealed, which meant if there were new substantial pieces of evidence, that Bishop could be tried again for the murders of Nicola and Karen. That's where forensic science stepped in. I love forensic science. And Roy Green of Eurofins was asked to reanalyse the evidence recovered from the Hadaway Fellows crime scene. By 2015, Eurofins were pleased to announce to the police that they had recovered a 1,000,000,000-to-1 DNA match. This match confirmed that the blue Pinto sweatshirt had belonged to Bishop. Eurofins also found Bishop's DNA on Karen's left arm. In October 2016, Bishop was taken from his prison cell where he was serving the sentence for the kidnapping, rape, and attempted murder of the 7-year-old in 1990, and brought to the police station where he was once again arrested and formally charged with the 1986 murders of Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway. Lawyers deliberated whether the police had enough evidence to go forward with a second trial, and after many hours of deliberation, they concluded that the 1987 acquittal was to be quashed, and that Russell Bishop would once again stand trial. Upon hearing the news, Susan Fellows fainted and had a panic attack that saw her hospitalised. When speaking to the Mirror newspaper, Sue said, quote, "It was a build-up of stress. I thought that was going to be it. I've been on antidepressants since Nicola's murder, and I have often considered jumping off Brighton Pier just to be with her." End quote. The Fellows and Hadaway families were elated at the news that Bishop had finally been arrested, but the arrest brought to the forefront the trauma and the stress that they had tried to bury for so long. The whole proceeding took 9 weeks, with the prosecution and defence painstakingly presenting their evidence and trying to prove why it was either reliable or unreliable, respectively. The prosecution also brought up the false allegations against Barry Fellows, as Bishop told the courts that, quote, "The police have spent the last 32 years trying to convict an innocent man," end quote. with him alluding to the fact that Barry Fellows was the real killer. Prosecutor Brian Altman QC said, quote, "What you have seen unfolding before your eyes is the creation by the defendant of a smokescreen in the hope that, quite literally, he gets away with murder for a second time." End quote. The courts called back witnesses from the original 1987 trial, and the prosecution stated that the tapings of DNA from Karen's arm had been preserved exceptionally well in 1986. Of course, in 86, DNA was in its infancy, and it wouldn't be until 1987 that DNA was used for the first time in courts in England and Wales to secure the conviction of Colin Pitchfork. After presenting evidence, calling up witnesses, cross-examinations, and back-and-forth arguments, both sides delivered their closing statements, and the jury was asked to retire to reach a verdict. Amazingly, much like the first trial, the jury only took 2.5 hours to decide their verdict, and when they returned to the courtroom, their answer would shock everyone. Sue Fellows did not attend the 2018 trial, citing that it would be far too stressful for her, although after the fact she did say that she regretted not being there to watch Bishop's reaction. As the head juror delivered their verdict, those in the gallery roared and burst into tears. Russell Bishop had officially been found guilty of the 1986 murders of Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway. On December 11, 2008, Russell Bishop would appear in court for the final time. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment following the guilty verdict from the jury. The judge recommended that Bishop serve at least 36 years in prison before he is eligible for parole. However, due to the nature of his crimes and past offences, it's very unlikely that he will ever be released. Following Bishop's sentencing, the Fellows and Hadaway families made 2 statements. The first reads, "Nicola and Karen are beautiful girls. We will never forget their smiles that would light up a room, their laughter, their cheekiness. During the past 8 weeks, we have enjoyed reliving the horrific details of their murder, and we have learned an awful lot about the true meaning of heartbreak over and over again. We stand here as 2 families united in our grief, united in our fight for justice, and now united in our relation at today's guilty verdict. We're extremely relieved and grateful that our 32 years hard-fought battle has been a success, finally getting the rightful, long-awaited justice for both of our girls. We want to thank the police teams, council, and everyone else who have been fantastic during the past couple of decades. If it wasn't for their efforts and dedication working with us, we wouldn't be stood here today. Together, we have changed history with this double jeopardy ruling, and we finally have the correct outcome. Russell Bishop remains behind bars where he belongs." The guilty verdict doesn't bring Nicola and Karen back, but we know that other children are now safe from the hands of Russell Bishop. He's a monster, a predatory paedophile. Russell Bishop is truly evil personified. The second statement made by Michelle Hadaway reads, quote, "After 32 years of fighting, we finally have justice for Karen and Nicola. Time stood still for us in 1986. To us, them beautiful girls will always be 9 years old. They will never grow up. We've been deprived of a happy life to watch them grow into adults. What people like Bishop inflict on the families of their victims is a living death. They take the lives of children, but they also take the lives of the families left behind. Kaz and Nikki, as they were affectionately known, were friends playing out together only to have their lives wiped out by a sexual deviant. A monster. What's been hard, horrendous, and heartbreaking is to hear that they were murdered by a disgusting paedophile, who we actually knew the 2 girls, and they liked him and trusted him. He abused that trust. Bishop doesn't deserve to breathe the same clean air as we do. After all, he decided that day to strangle the life out of our 2 angels, leaving them nowhere to breathe. What makes a man want to squeeze the life out of 2 innocent children with his bare hands? Unbelievable when he had a child himself and another on the way. He is a coward without conscience, and I don't believe that you can rehabilitate evil. I think Bishop was just born that way. People talk to me of forgiveness, but I can never forgive or forget what the evil monster did to my beautiful Kaz and Nikki. I'm trying so hard to get my head around this, but I will because I'm a fighter, and I'll never stop being strong for my family." End quote. When the verdict was made public, many newspapers and news outlets chose to focus on Bishop, dissecting his life and every aspect of his personality. However, we cannot forget that this case is truly about the 2 innocent 9-year-old girls whose lives he stole from them. This episode is dedicated to Karen, Nicola, and their families. You will forever live on in the hearts of the British people.